Hello viewers and welcome to the channel. In a previous video I show how to create dynamic ranges by using named ranges. Now Microsoft recently introduced a new function called TRIMRANGE, which essentially does the same thing. However, it's only available in Microsoft 365, so either the app or Excel Online, which is what I'm using here. So if you haven't seen my other video, I invite you to check it out, especially if you don't have 365. So with TRIMRANGE, it allows you to trim leading and or trailing blanks from around the outer edges of a specified range. So essentially it gives you the used data range. Prior to TRIMRANGE, a lookup, for example, you would have to specify a from and to lookup and a from and to return range. And that's not dynamic because as you add extra data, you then need to change your formulas to include that. You could make it dynamic by specifying entire columns, but that can be inefficient depending on how much data you have and the complexity of the formulas. TRIMRANGE, however, allows you to specify entire columns with little impact on performance. So here we're trimming columns B and C, and we're specifying a row trim type and a column trim type. A value of 1 trims leading, a value of 2 trims trailing, and 3 does both. And as you can see from the blue outer line here, it's only including from the header down to the last product row. So how do we use this in an XLOOKUP, for example? So here we're looking up the value prod 8 inside this range defined by the first trim range, and it is trimming leading and trailing blank rows from column B. So essentially gives you from the header down to the last row. And then we return the range defined by this trim range. So similar thing, it's trimming leading and trailing blank rows from column C. So essentially from price header down to the last price. And if it's not found, we return 0. So let's see this in action. We're going to add a new product here, and then when we select it, it will automatically pick it up without having changed the formula. So when we embed TRIMRANGE inside our formulas, it can make them a little verbose. So Microsoft also has a shorthand version of TRIMRANGE, and that's called trim references or trim refs. And the syntax is a simple dot. So a dot before the colon will trim leading, and a dot after will trim trailing. And both will do leading and trailing. And in our XLOOKUP, we just replace our TRIMRANGE in our lookup and our return. As you can see, it looks a little neater. However, if you do have a complex formula, the dot can sometimes be hard to spot. So I do prefer to use TRIMRANGE. Now, despite being the shorthand version of TRIMRANGE, there are slight differences, and these aren't often documented out there on the web. I'm going to show you a few of them that I know of. So this dotted line represents the range that we're going to be looking up. So the trim range is going to trim from M5 top left to P9 bottom right, and we've got trim type for row as both and trim type for column as both. And as you can see again from the blue outline, that's the data that's been returned. It's excluded the outer blanks. And the trim refs, similar thing, M5 to P9, and we're trimming both leading and trailing. Now this is where one of the differences occurs. As you can see, it's only showing the top left cell. If I get rid of the bottom dot, the trailing dot, you'll see the bottom right. Okay, now it's not a big issue, just something to keep in mind. Whereas the trim range, it highlights the entire range that we're looking up. Now the second difference is that with a trim range function, you can specify a separate trim type for row and column. But with the dot operator, you can't. It applies to both. So whatever you specify, leading or trailing, it'll apply to both rows and columns. Now, I haven't really thought of a real use case where I would have different row and column trim types. You might, but I'll give you an example of what it might look like. So if we decide to trim only trailing columns, you see that the leading blanks are now included as zeros here. Now we could get rid of the zeros by doing an ampersand double quote for blanks if you wanted. With the trim refs, there's no way of having separate row and column trim types. So just a minor thing, just something to keep in mind of. If you need to do something like that, then just use the trim range. Now both trim range and trim refs, the formulas cannot be used in named ranges in the refers to. So if you do need to add it to a named range, you could put the formula in, let's say, a hidden worksheet, and then set the named range refers to point to the cell containing the formula. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please hit the like button, and we'll see you on the next video.